Hey there.
Um, are you here for the museum tour today?
Yeah,
And what exhibits were you looking to see?
I really want to see some fossils.
Fossils, any specific state?
I'm really passionate about fossils of Florida.
Fossils of Florida. Wow, you don't say. We just got a new Florida fossil exhibit. Let me see if I can find any times available. Oh, looks like I can squeeze you in.
Yay!
All right, right this way. All right, so our first exhibit is very unique. It's right in this section over here.
Here we have a part of a bone of an ancient manatee, possibly the dugong, or the more common name as most Floridians know it, the Florida sea cow. Because manatees usually like to inhabit warm, brackish water, we can assume that Florida was underwater during this time. This fossil was likely originally deposited somewhere in the middle to late Miocene.
The next exhibit's right through this door.
As you can probably guess, this fossil is a tooth, but not really like the teeth that you and I have. This tooth belongs to a shark. To be more specific, it likely belonged to a tiger shark. This likely means that when this tooth was deposited, Florida was again underwater. So why, might you ask, did all these sharks go extinct, or their population at least decrease a lot? Well, when sea levels started to drop, all of the places that used to be shallow marine shark nursery sites began to dry up, making it harder for the shark population to continue at the same level that it was before. This fossil was likely deposited somewhere between the Miocene and the Pliocene.
This next exhibit, things get a little interesting. Why don't you come take a look? Let me do this.
Next, we have what looks to be an ancient horse tooth. Horse teeth began to grow, and they became more durable as their diet eventually shifted from foliage to more grasses that became available in Florida. This change can be documented in the horse's teeth over time. Because we know that these horses lived on land, usually in grasses, we can infer that during this time period, Florida was above the sea level. These fossils may have been deposited during the late Miocene all the way up to the Pleistocene.
Our next exhibit is a little tricky to get to, but I promise it'll be worth it.
Here we have the humble echinoid. This little sea biscuit calls marine environments its home. This can tell us that during the time this fossil was deposited, Florida was likely underwater. This echinoid was probably in Florida around the early to mid Pleistocene.
Let's take a look at our next fossil.
This fossil here appears to be a type of spindle shell. It used to be the home of likely a gastropod, also known as a mollusk. This fossil likely indicates that at the time it was deposited, Florida was underwater. There was also likely a large carbonate shelf, seeing that this fossil has been preserved for so long. This fossil was likely deposited somewhere between the late Pliocene and the mid-Pleistocene.
Want a snack? Complimentary snacks here at this museum.
Speaking of snacks, next on our list is this little oyster. It looks like it's been through a lot to get here to us today, as you can tell by the abrasion on the shell. Because we know oysters usually like to live on or near coastlines, we can assume that when this fossil was deposited, that area of Florida used to be the coastline. This fossil was likely deposited around the early Pliocene to the late Pleistocene.
This next fossil is really cool.
Here we have a beautiful tower shell. This was likely the home to a mollusk. And when this fossil was deposited, Florida was likely underwater, or at least this part of Florida may have been a carbonate shelf. This fossil was probably deposited around the late Pliocene to the late Pleistocene. And here we have another little gastropod friend, commonly known as the cone snail. The cone snail would likely be found in shallow marine environments like a carbonate shelf. So Florida was likely somewhat underwater, and part of the coastline was a carbonate shelf. This gastropod likely lived during the late Pliocene to the early Pleistocene.
This next fossil is really something special.
Here we have a small but mighty bivalve. You can actually distinctively see the sinuses of this bivalve. Neat. This bivalve can help us see where Florida's coastline used to be, and based on the location this bivalve was found in Florida, we can determine that the coastline of Florida may have been more inland than it is today, indicating that most of Florida was underwater. This fossil was likely deposited from the late Miocene up until the late Pleistocene. This next bivalve is a little bit larger and it's more spiky than the previous smooth bivalve. It has some radial spurs that may make it a little bit more difficult for some to handle. This bivalve can also be found in shallow marine environments, likely on a carbonate shelf. It was likely deposited between the early Pliocene to the late Pleistocene.
Thank you for visiting the Florida Fossil Museum.
Thanks for having me.
Anytime, come back and see us soon.
Bye.